Hi, it's Renee with Reset with Renee, and I'm here to share with you about my own reset. So, the title of this episode is Next Piece of the Puzzle, and I'm going to share with you what that puzzle piece has been for me. So, first, I'm going to give you some context before I share what the reset is about. But basically, I recently had an assessment done for autism and ADHD and met criteria for both. So AUDHD is something that's talked about, and I identify with the traits and the characteristics that travel. Not all of them, some of them. Everybody has a different constellation. So we'll get into more of that as things unfold, but I wanted to give you the layup to it. Many of you know I specialize in CPTSD recovery, and so I've invested a significant amount of money, energy, and time into that process personally and to contribute to the care I provide for people that work with me. So that's been big. Um, What's different now, though, and what I'm sharing is that when I've gone through things before personally, so my CPTSD recovery or recovery from narcissistic abuse in various relationships, things like that, I've typically waited till I'm on the other side or close to on the other side to share my experience, learning insights with people, either publicly like this or more intimately like in a one-to-one session. So this go around, I am going to be real with you about what's unfolding in real time. So that's a little bit different for me. Um, I really hope that my story helps serve other people who are still searching for truth about themselves and looking for their missing puzzle pieces and they're looking for the information that would help give them the total picture of the puzzle as a cohesive, coherent whole. Because until you have that, you really often feel like you're missing something inside, you're seeking, you feel lost, you feel like you're failing sometimes at therapy and other endeavors. And so having that puzzle piece is important. Okay, I typed some of this up, so I'm looking at my notes. Um, so one of the things that I learned from having my assessment is that a lot of folks get to have an assessment because their journey of trauma healing hasn't worked to the degree that they thought they would feel healed. So that's part of what my experience has been. Um, and then the other is what a colleague called the HSP, highly sensitive person to autism pipeline. So there's a lot of us that are late diagnosed. So late diagnosed means different things to different people. I got diagnosed at 50. There's some people who are in their 20s and 30s and consider themselves late diagnosed because they weren't diagnosed in childhood. So there's a lot of us Gen Xers out there that are getting diagnosed at this stage of life, and it's a journey. um, so I'm going to share with you how I got to the point of wanting an assessment. So last year I got engaged, which was a good positive event in my world. And then we moved in together. I moved into his home. And that was a real blessing and a serious upgrade. I'd been living in a rental for like 6 or 7 years, and my landlord situation wasn't ideal. And so there was some stress with the living environment. So, anyway, so a lot of positive changes. I was on this hardcore CPTSD recovery journey, like round two of a healing container program. Got engaged, wonderful guy, upgraded my home environment, like things are moving. And so that was happening. And then the summer, as I was settling in, I kept having like all these like major activations. during the week and also on the weekend. So what it would look like inside for me was like irritability, um, having a lot more sensitivity with that highly sensitive, like there's a baseline of highly sensitive, and then there's like this extra thing that happens, especially for people when they're in burnout. And I've been in burnout for a while. And then I've come to learn the word alexithymia, which is so interesting because it means it's hard for a person to know what's going on inside. And so for a lot of us, female, late diagnosed folks in the healing arts, we do so well at helping other people um, locate and describe and work with their internal world, but when it comes to ours, it can be more challenging. So I was having that, like I'd have an activation, it would take me a couple days to work through it and then be able to like have clarity and feel like I could work through it in a way that would be helpful. So it's not exactly what I thought would be the case after a couple of years of hardcore CPTSD recovery. So it was really confusing and it was frustrating, and I felt like I was failing at my own personal work. Um, and I have done a lot of work. I've evolved a lot. There's been a lot of good work done, but like you want a different result than what I was experiencing. So that's what was going on, like on a personal level. And then also for the last couple of years, since I've been back into business for myself, I've been a founding member of Superwell, the Superwell Collective. So it's other providers, therapists, and coaches that work with people who are neurodiverse or neurocomplex. And so when you identify that way, you want to find providers who are neuroaffirming and neuroinclusive. Otherwise, you kind of run the risk of being treated like a neurotypical person who's supposed to respond to treatments in a neurotypical way, and that's not how we roll. So that's definitely something that I've learned. So as I followed the creator of Superwell and her posts, Lindsay McGrath at Method, um, just more and more of them started to land. One of them in particular was about a common stim. So stim is like a behavior, physical behavior that people engage in to like help regulate, like upregulate or downregulate. And so that post happened to be about gum chewing. And I was like, oh my God, that is me. I chew gum all the time. It's a thing my mom used to comment about, like, if I really cared, I'd be self-conscious about it, but I've always figured better that than putting food in my mouth constantly or smoking or doing something else. So that one really got my attention. And so I started, the Instagram algorithm brought me to other content creators who were talking about neurodiversity, neurocomplexity, ADHD, autism, AUDHD, all the things. And so I've been really like going down the rabbit hole of seeing what other people's journeys have been, experiences, what's out there. Um, so that's how I got to the point of like, this is resonating. That fits. That gives a more cohesive picture. um, a more connected understanding of various things that I've experienced in my life, like in relationships, in my body, with my mental health. So then I needed to rumble with like, do I want to get assessed and have an official diagnosis or not given to me by another mental health provider? That's always a tricky spot. And there have been times in my life where I've worked with people and I've been reluctant to immediately open up about what I felt or other things because I was afraid of like, well, what diagnosis are they going to give me? I know which ones are looked upon badly, and I don't want to have that. And so it's a vulnerable spot to put yourself in. And so a lot of people I've come to find out have been through assessment processes with people who are not up to date on neurodivergence and neurocomplexity, and the mark was missed. And so there's a lot of folks with neurodivergence and neurocomplexity walking around who've been carrying a lot of misdiagnosis. So So that was a piece that I was concerned about, you know, and someone had suggested like, well, you know, why do you need a diagnosis? Why do you need to be assessed? Just know your truth. And there's validity in that perspective. And so there's a whole piece about um, the importance and the value of self-identifying for so many reasons. One, it's hard to access for a lot of people. It's often not covered, and so it's expensive to pay out of pocket. And then what does it realistically get you in the end? It can help you find resources and community, just like any other diagnosis would point you in a certain direction. But for most of us, it's about self-advocacy. So that was a piece of it. Like, do I want the diagnosis or not? I'm not a big fan of the medical model and diagnosis as it all exists today. Um, but I really wanted to know what it was like to go from self-identifying to having a formal assessment so that I could have the full experience. So if I work with other people now or down the road and they ask the question and they're rumbling too, I can share with them what I've learned. Um, and so by and large, what I've seen is that if you find a neuro-affirming, neuro-inclusive provider or someone who's going to assess you, like they're going to be looking for things that aren't typical presentation, especially if someone identifies as female, for instance. We don't convey the same kinds of quote unquote characteristics as others. So you need somebody who has some nuance and understanding in that to do the assessment and work with you. So I was assessed for both autism and ADHD and met criteria for both. Um, Filling out the questionnaires was its own process. I mean, I felt like I would have a different result depending upon which day, which part of the day I filled it out. And if I was reading the questions liberally, like literally, or if I was assuming that a question was looking for a specific trait that I knew I did or didn't have. So it didn't land well, it didn't feel right. Um, but I was, oh yeah, and the other thing is between the time I completed the assessments, the questionnaires, and the time I met with um, my evaluator, it's like my perspective shifted so much. It was like I almost wanted to retake the questionnaires. Because once I took them, like for real, for someone else to look at it, I really started to pay more attention and have more awareness about what was happening inside of me and when and where I was being like more triggered and having a harder time. So it was helpful that once I met with a psychologist, you know, she asked a lot of questions about my experience. And for folks who are highly masked, which a lot of female identifying clients are highly masked because that's what we've been socialized to do. Um, it's almost like you mask so hard you don't even know you're masking anymore, but you know you're paying an energetic price for it. So someone who gets the nuance of that is pretty important. And so I kept like focusing on, yeah, I know what's expected of me in these situations externally, like in a neurotypical world, and yet internally, this is my actual experience. This is what I actually feel the impulse to do or not to do. Um, so that was part of the rumble with the assessment process. So I've learned a lot and I'm just beginning. Um, Thanks for being patient while I take a drink. Seasonal allergies here in Arkansas are on fire for me, so my throat is so dry. Mm. So I will definitely be sharing more as I learn and research, you know, about the thing that I've always carried with me my whole life that has just been named and confirmed. Um, like I mentioned, being diagnosed late in life does bring relief and grief. Um, Now I understand why trauma healing wasn't enough for me. And the psychologist said, yeah, that's so common. So many people say they come to assessment going, something isn't adding up here. Um, and then the relief of like, oh gosh, I can see how all of this relates now. If before it felt like I had a pocket of this and a pocket of this and a pocket of this, and now it's like all under this umbrella, which seems to bring more coherence to the overall picture for me personally. And then there is grief. I mean, figuring this out at 50. I mean, I know there are people who are older than me figuring it out. Like, we've lost a lot of time. We've learned things the hard way because we didn't know. Um, so, and it adds another layer. I mean, developmental trauma isn't fun when you have a harder childhood or a harder family of origin story, generational trauma. Um, I've had a lot of adult trauma, which probably could have been avoided had I known. But nonetheless, and so you take all that trauma and then you take being neurodivergent and neurocomplex. That is a lot, a lot to sort through, to manage, to figure out, to resource. So if you, the listener, are resonating with that, I just want you to know I get it. It is a lot. Um, so one of the buckets that makes more sense to me now is some of the physical symptoms that I've had recently, like while in burnout, where my energy and capacity has been low, but also throughout like my lifetime, like really a lot of physical challenges can travel with autism. So for me, it started as an infant with colic. I had a lazy eye. I have a lazy eye. There's a higher correlation with autism and lazy eye. Allergies, like I just shared with you. So anything that has to do with inflammation or autoimmune, we have higher rates of that in the neurodivergent population. And there's other physical things I may or may not have, I may or may not know about, but I have heard about now. And so, helping people understand that is important to me. So, the one thing I forgot to mention was hormones. So, a lot of women that I speak with who are neurodivergent have had a lot of struggle with their hormones, their periods, their PMS, um, any aspect related to childbirth, perhaps like menopause. Like, there's never an easy time for hormones, I think, if you're neurodivergent. So for me, um, having a hysterectomy in my mid 40s and hitting, the time where it makes sense to be menopausal, it's like all these things are intersecting in a way that has been confounding, honestly. So now I know kind of what's pulling the thread together. Mm. So one of the things that has been part of my story and truth, and I know it's out there for others, is I do have a natural strength and drive. So like when I am well resourced, I'm not dealing with trauma or other really challenging life changes or physical issues. Like I've had a tremendous amount of energy. But when I am under resourced, when I am challenged, it's like there's lower capacity, but yet like the conditioning of society and the survival codes that you have as part of being a trauma survivor, um, really give you the message to just push through. And so a lot of folks like myself are highly masked because we know what's expected of us. We've met those expectations previously, and we continue to meet those expectations until we just can't anymore. And that's what burnout is. It's a drop in capacity, it's a drop in energy, it's an increase in physical health issues. For autistic burnout, it's like skill regression can happen where things you used to be able to do, well, it's like you can't. It's like you learned how to do those skills under one set of circumstances, but when you try to do them in another way, it doesn't go so well for you. So there's a lot of moving parts, literally and metaphorically, with a late in life diagnosis. Okay, and then I wanted to talk about and share a little bit about just the lack of research that has been done on female or female identifying people. A couple years ago, I read the book Divergent Mind, and it really spoke about that. And I'm so glad I had that information like ahead of some of the things I've experienced personally. So a lot of these diagnoses that are known have really been looked at through the lens of male identifying people's experiences. And so, for instance, like autism, when I learned about it in graduate school, about the DSM, I think there were like, I want to say nine, it might have been seven different kinds of labels used to describe what is now called the spectrum, but is really not PC language. And so um, there wasn't a whole lot of time given to understanding what it would look like in a non-typical presentation, meaning in another gender or in another constellation of symptoms, if you will. It was really like you're looking at a male who is having a meltdown, and anything outside of that was not discussed. So I can tell you, I mean, even though I'm a trained mental health professional licensed in a couple states, I was not educated fully on autism, on ADHD. A lot of that has come later, as I've worked with different people and sought out different trainings and had different experiences, personally and professionally. And so yeah, there's really I have some anger about the lack of research for females because I see it in my Gen X peers. We're all trying to figure out menopause just when there's just starting to be information, education, and advocacy about it. It's a whole nother thing. And then like this, the autism and the ADHD, we're just trying to figure it out. So the reality is that providers may not really be up to date on their understanding of neurodiversity and neurocomplexity. It's no longer that someone is on a spectrum. It's like they are part of a complex umbrella of a variety of characteristics that can be strengths and or challenges given that person's environment, given the person's level of support and things like that. Um, Again, looking at my notes. And so, yeah, what's happened in the mental health and the medical community is a lot of folks who are neurodivergent or neurocomplex have been minimized. They've been gaslit, they've been judged, they've been given advice and treatment geared towards someone who would be neurotypical. And so therefore it's not attuned with what a neurodivergent person might need for their total care, mind, body, heart, spirit. So this is a setup for failure for pretty much everybody. um, so piece I'll add is given that context, being neurodivergent or neurocomplex, whatever language you prefer, it's pretty traumatic in and of itself. Um, Autism is a neurodevelopmental condition, mostly genetic. And so it's not something that is a sign that someone's broken. It's a sign that that person has different wiring, like their brains literally are set up different and work differently. And um, that's why things can take more energy and why your reactivity can be higher. because there's more information coming in and a harder time processing it sometimes. Um, so that's why I'm sharing my experiences so that other people can be more aware, informed, and educated about this isn't a disorder, although it can be disabling if a person's wiring isn't supported. We're often called the canaries in the coal mine because of our super responsive sensory systems. We can pick up on problems and patterns before other folks, other neurotypicals do. And so really like we're often not listened to. People don't want to know, they don't want to hear it. But if we can be accommodated, the things that bother us, the things that we see can be addressed, we're really like doing a service for the collective. Things that help us to accommodate don't hurt anyone, and they're more likely to help more people than the ones who are asking for an environment or a space to be neuro-inclusive. Taking another drink of water. Mm. So like I said, it's a major puzzle piece for me. It's led to more cohesive narrative, having the developmental trauma and adult trauma, and the neurological developmental difference, and have it all that not being known for so long. Um, I really think some of those adult traumas could have been prevented. So I'll give you a couple examples. Like one is for a lot of neurodivergent folks, they have a strong sense of justice and injustice. And that runs through my family tree. And for me, what it looked like was me fighting one individual up against a couple different kinds of systems where there was injustice done to me directly, indirectly, or both. Um, and fighting that injustice caused me great personal cost in many ways. Um, had I understood the justice piece, I may have handled that differently had I known. I don't know in hindsight if I would have done things differently or not. Um, but that is a piece. And then even though we're highly perceptive, sometimes we have pockets of naivete or kind of like a blind spot when it comes to like predatory behavior. And so there's definitely been some relationships that I've been a part of personally and professionally that I think with this knowledge maybe could have been avoided or minimized more. Um, so that's another piece. Um, and then there's also anger, just again about what I said about the lack of research, especially for females, as it relates to all aspects of our health. And many of us ladies have been conditioned to be caregivers at home and to carry quite a heavy load at work. And we've done that while holding it together, masking, supporting others while no one's had our back. So I can share with you that, for folks who identify like ADHD, autism, ADHD, one of the wounds is like feeling disconnected, feeling different, like no one sees you, hears you, understands you, gets you. So to have that internal feeling all the time, but providing, performing, pleasing, doing all the masking for other people it's a rub, it's exhausting. So if you know a late identified female, have some grace and compassion and mercy for her and support her, get her back. And also, I have a lot of humility. I mean, I recently did a class. It's for sale. If you look on my link tree, it's called Discover Your Gifts. And I did that class because it's all about using the framework of the gene keys to discover your shadow side and to acknowledge and discover more of your gifts. And so this is like been a major shadow side. It's been a major blind spot for me. And in hindsight, I can share and be honest with you all that there have been people in my personal life who I can now look at as neurodivergent, or I knew they were then, and they were so challenging for me and so frustrating for me and felt like obstacles to getting what I wanted. Um, and so I could be dismissive and judgmental, like, why can't they see what it is they're doing or not doing and figure it out, you know? So that's one of the burdens of being highly masked. You don't get um, you don't get acknowledged, but yet you're holding a lot. So I forgive myself. My protective parts were working pretty hard in the direction of making sure I pleased and performed en masse to fit the external expectations of the neurotypical world instead of being seen as different for the ways that my system is different. So I know there will be more that'll unfold, that I'll learn, that I'll integrate. You know, my first priority for me personally is to find ways to honor my truth, um, and to work with my burnout and regain capacity. I'm hoping that is possible. I'll be on the search for medical providers who specialize in helping folks with neurodiversity, as well as connecting with other therapists and coaches who are neuroaffirming and neuro-inclusive in their work that they do. And so if you know of some, I welcome your suggestions for any of your favorite neuroaffirming providers, supports, resources, community, and things like that. And I want you to know I aim to be that person myself for the people that I work with. So in the end, I'm grateful. I've arrived at this place of deeper self-knowing. It's an overdue reset for me personally and professionally. And I hope that by sharing my journey, that others will be invited to increase their understanding, awareness, and to support all of us with advocacy. Acknowledging my neurodiversity and neurocomplexity publicly or personally is like a coming out. You know, when you think of coming out for folks who are um, coming out about their sexuality, it's like you hope to be seen, supported, and understood, but at the same time, you're preparing yourself for any level of negative reaction, from minimization and denial to discrimination and rejection. Um, so I want you, the listener, to know I don't see my AUDHD or anybody else's um, as a condition that needs to be stigmatized. And I know that it is. There are historical events that have happened that have tried to stamp out autism. There are places online when you search that look like they are for helping autistics, but it's really about trying to make an autistic person neurotypical instead of supporting them. And that's not what I want for anyone. I want people to be able to live their best version of themselves, to be supported, to be known, and to be authentic. So I hope that I'm one of many voices that are calling in a movement towards neuroinclusivity and neuroaffirming as the norm rather than the exception. So thank you for listening to my story. There's bits and pieces I'm sure I've left out and I'll think about later. I welcome your comments and questions. And I invite those of you who are in a similar place where you're questioning what you are and what you have and what you want to do with that. Um, I'm open to discuss that with you. If you aren't already informed or aware, I do therapy for folks who are residents of Missouri or Arkansas, and I do life coaching for people anywhere. And I also offer consultations. So if you're not really sure like what you're looking for or what you want, you can schedule an Ask Renee consultation session. I have different time, like lengths of time of the session to choose from. So lots of options for us to connect. And so I want to thank everybody for listening today and joining me on another podcast episode of Reset with Renee. Take care, everybody.